Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I am going to be reviewing slash recapping or giving my retrospective thoughts on the challenge The Ruins. If I remember correctly, this is the final season that has the Road Rules Real World title in it, so that would kind of end here. And honestly, my opinions on this season are very mixed. It is leaning more towards negative, but I don't overall have negative thoughts on the season, at least compared to The Island. There's a lot of history with the veterans leading up to the season, with the whole Wes, Kenny, Johanna, Kellyanne, Kahada, love slash lust pentagon that was happening. A few of the veterans that haven't been on in a while decided to come back, like Veronica and Ibis, Doral, so on and so forth. And there are some of the newbies who have been on the last few seasons but aren't really established that's been appearing. They come back here. Overall, on paper, the cast is star-studded, with the exception of some of the challengers. The issue is, this season is just way too toxic, and while there are some really good fights here, a lot of the others are just way too unpleasant and unenjoyable to watch. Everyone was in a really negative mood during the season. Apparently this was one of the first, if not the first season, where they really weren't allowed to go outside, compared to how they were in past seasons, so they are very restricted here. Apparently, their bathrooms weren't really working to the point where they only had one washroom and one toilet, and that broke down at some point. And then they were given less food than usual and more alcohol than usual, which was really just a recipe for disaster. There's also the misogyny that was prevalent on the last few seasons, really, I don't know if peaking is the word, since I feel like it peaked on Island, but the fact that a lot of people who contribute to that toxic misogynistic atmosphere on the island come back in the ruins, and they're essentially rewarded for it then to come back here. It really just leads to a very ugly dynamic. And then there's a few physical fights that happen on the season, and I think it's tied with Final Reckoning for being the most physical season when it comes to that. And in addition to all of that, honestly, the season was very boring competitively, where the challengers literally only won one challenge. It was very clear that the champions were going to just dominate, and they did dominate. And it wasn't really as interesting as it was on the Godspits 3, because at least there was the throwing the challenge stuff, and the misogyny really wasn't as notable on that season. I feel like the cast on the Godspits 3 in general was just better than the Ruins. There is the lawsuit situation that came from the season, which I don't know if I'm going to talk about here or if I'm going to talk about it more on the Era 2 analysis slash recap. But in general, I feel like production and the network were encouraging all of the actions that would happen on this season just from how they handled it on the prior seasons, and it just had a combination of a lot of the ickiness that happened here. And I feel like this season was the start of the fact that there really needed to be a change, though the aftermath didn't come, at least until a few seasons afterwards. You can tell that a lot of the veterans, and by the veterans I mean the people that were debuting in late Era 1, they realized around this point in time that they needed to kind of move on with their lives, so they would either retire or take long hiatus after this. I could say so much more, but I think I should just get to it, and yeah. Veronica comes back after a long retirement, as this is her first season in this era, and most of the people she played with during the last era are nowhere on the show anymore. Sarah auditioned for the real world so she could be on the challenge, so she is very thrilled. Dunbar reveals that he broke up with his girlfriend and then tried something with Kimberly, but that didn't work out, though they do end up hooking up throughout this season. Cyrus also came out of a long hiatus as well, as I believe his last season was The Gauntlet 2, and Kenny and Johanna talk about just being friends, and Wes comes out of his 4th-season hiatus, which I think was a retirement at the time, where he came back so he could stir up drama due to the Kenny and Johanna situation. He and Kellyanne are dating, which we did learn from the Island reunion, and Kahada reveals that he has not spoken to Kellyanne since the Island. Danny is now married to Melinda, and Katie is now engaged. So the teams are split by the champions, so the people who have won, and the challengers. In my note, I had them as the contenders. I think I was thinking of some other reality TV show. But yeah. So essentially, the challengers are the rookies and vets who have never won. Everyone has individual bank accounts, so if you beat someone in elimination, you take all their money. And yeah, West knows that JFK and Derek, I guess, is a thing, and now all of them dislike him, so there's tension between them and West immediately. Everyone is drinking and having fun outside, with Tanya being drunk out of her mind and is naked while partying. Derek is putting her to bed, and she's really rubbing people the wrong way, and she's throwing up in a bucket. West and Johanna have a mature conversation about not wanting to fight one another, and she does speak about the island in general. Evan calls out West for not telling anyone that he wasn't coming on the season, so Evan doesn't trust him. And Evan admits what always happens with pre-gaming and asking people if they are going to do the season. And it's so refreshing to actually see this on the show, since people act like it's not a thing, and even production tries to act like it's not a thing, but it was always a thing well before the season, and it continued to be a thing well after the season, up until the present day that I am recording this. Kenny shit talks West, but he doesn't really have that same energy once West approaches him to his face, where West tells Kenny to fuck himself, and he's wearing the ugliest hat ever. He goes to his girlfriend Kelly Ann, and they realize that everyone hates them, where they are crazy for signing up with this, to the point where they created their own bedroom. Darrell shit talks West to Kenny and John about West being worse than him in every single manner competitively, so I guess there's some tension there between the two still from fresh meat. The champions decide to have a meeting about how they are going to handle the voting, and West suggests doing the writing on the paper thing, but he's immediately shut down. DM, Sarah, Siobhan, and Kelly Ann tries to do the same thing, but nothing really comes from this conversation, though West tells Kelly Ann that he will throw challenges for her team. Tanya talks about now living in Washington, as she's now separated from her husband, went through a lot of shit, and then we see Tanya arguing with Evelyn randomly over some joke, and she demands Evelyn to stop, though Evelyn really doesn't get it at all, and she doesn't really see why Tanya is so furious at her. Tanya is getting physical with Evelyn and is having her outside of her... Sorry, they are both outside on the balcony, and Tanya shoves and pushes Evelyn several times, and honestly, it's just sad to watch. And even looking at Tanya's face, you could see that her face got a bit bloated or it got a bit puffier due to all the alcohol that she must have been drinking since her last season. Evelyn gives Wes advice on how to handle the team, and he tells Brad and Danny to tell his team that Wes is throwing the challenges to help the challengers, though Evelyn reports all of this to the champions team. So before every challenge, 3 guys and 3 girls from each team have to nominate themselves, and whomever loses, 1 person from each team will face elimination. And that will be decided by the winning team. Before every challenge, 3 guys... Sorry, I already said that. Darrell, Kenny, Wes, Johanna, Susie, and Tanya volunteer for the champions, with Chet, Kahara, Nick, DM, Sarah, and Siobhan volunteering for the challengers. The challenge chain gang is where the entire team is on a rope. They have to climb over one another to get to the surface and ring the gong. It's a fine enough challenge, and we've seen this in many seasons since. There's some banter between Wes and his team regarding him throwing, but the vets come up with a plan ahead of time to put Ibis right above Wes, so she sacrifices herself and him so they can drop before Wes can throw it for all of them. The champions win, so the challengers have to vote for people to go into elimination. Also, actually no, that's a lie. The champions have to choose the people who have to go into elimination. So, we move on to Darrell, who is sick of Wes throwing and just everything about Wes in general, goes after Wes and calls Kellyanne a bitch that fucked everyone in the house. And those are his words. So, the couple go at him, and there's a back and forth between the 3 of them, where she mentions that she only got with 3 people, and it's kind of awkward that Adam was referenced as one of the people, since she has later mentioned that he has SA'd her, essentially, so it wasn't consensual at all. Doral mentions to Wes that they can go outside to fight like men, and Wes is about it. So everyone is rushing and following the two of them down the house, where Wes is yelling that Doral wants to fight me outside, and production is refusing to let them go outside. Honestly, it's just mad chaos, and honestly, I just find this entire situation so hilarious. Where Doral now wants to wait until tomorrow, though Wes is chanting like claiming that Doral isn't about that life, though as we see later on in the season, Doral is about that life. So the champions vote in Tanya to go against DM, and honestly, this is just very weird as hell. Since DM is good with damn near all the champions, they have always protected her on prior seasons and even future seasons. So the fact that they chose her to go in first out of all the rookies and all the people they don't like on the Challengers team is just very odd. And Wes volunteers, though they all call him out because they knew that he was going in anyways, and he wants to go against Chet. Johanna rants to Katie about Wes throwing the challenges and how he has no say in the challenge, and Wes tells Kahada that they will be facing one another in elimination. Tanya is being poked and prodded by Kenny and Evan, and she is drunk out of her mind, with them insulting her where she needs to be cheered up by Chet, and it's honestly just sad when you know the story about Tanya and Evan/Kenny. The cast decides to mess around in the room next to Wes and Kelly Ann to disturb them, but it just made the two of them sleep upstairs, though Wes stated in podcast well after the season that they would do stuff like this all the time to torture him when he was trying to sleep, and it's just kind of awful. Danny tries speaking to Wes, who is steadfast in his ways, and Katie is trying to bring peace to them, but JFKD aren't listening at all. Wes beats Chet and Tanya beats DM. It is really odd that DM out of nowhere decides to volunteer to be a leader, and for most of her real-life friends on the other team to vote her in, but allegedly, she only did this season for a quick appearance fee, and that would make sense since we wouldn't see her for the next few seasons, and I'm assuming this is when she was trying to focus on her career. Chet does have some wit to him with his bow tie thing as well, making him unique, so I do see why he came back for a few more seasons, despite being a first boot here, but I don't have anything else to say. So there is talk about another champions meeting, but Evan is apprehensive of doing it, since Wes clearly just doesn't give a fuck, though Evelyn is arguing for Wes' case. Evelyn and Kellyanne are talking about Johanna, and the two women are still friends from the island, and they're still hated by most of the cast. I believe they're still friends today, just from what Leanne stated on her recent podcast with Banana, so that's nice to know. Johanna speaks to Wes about the situation with the team, and she does not like Wes parading around with Kellyanne, and he mentions the situation with Kenny. But the overall thing is that Johanna is not fending for Wes anymore, though it didn't really seem like she ever did fend for him anyways, at least regarding this season. Bananas and Kenny plot with Katie and Johanna about Evelyn going in against Kenny Ann, since they want to hurt Wes more, since Evelyn really became a Wes ally, and throwing Kellyanne in also adds more effect because that is Wes's girlfriend. Evan speaks his plan to Casey and Sarah, and of course they are fine with it because it means that they don't have to go in. Casey and Siobhan volunteer themselves, though Brad finds it odd that Casey is volunteering herself. Kellyanne, Casey, Siobhan, Nick, Kahada, and Dan are nominated from the challengers, and Derek, Johnny, Wes, Evelyn, Katie, and Susie are nominated from the champions. The challenge is called Swing On By, where they have to grab a rope and swing it around so they can land on a platform, and this was a relatively simple but somewhat aesthetically looking challenge, if you can kind of make sense of that. Siobhan falls poorly in the water twice, and she's sure that she bursted an implant, though some people were laughing initially, but they eventually became worried. Of course, the champions win this, and they decide to nominate Wes with Nick, where Evelyn wants to go against Casey, but the team shut it down because they One, because Casey and Siobhan suck so much in the challenges, so Killian is the only other choice. I do get the rationale with wanting to keep Siobhan and Casey around, but the way they handle this, and specifically throwing in Evelyn, is just them being douches and bragging about it. Wes and Evelyn are blindsided and they are really pissed off since they realize that they were ahead. The both of them are yelling and getting into Banana's face and chest bumping him several times. So he brushes them back. Weston says, "Oh, you're hitting a girl, blah 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 blah," though he didn't hit her. And then Evelyn throws some strays back at Susie in this, because I guess she blames Susie for this. After the elimination, Evelyn and Wes throw a huge tantrum that just goes on and on and on and on, and continue going after the team, where Evelyn is throwing and kicking things and Wes shoves Bananas a few more times. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, this is good. This was very good to watch, I'm not gonna lie. This is some great upper tier drama. Evelyn refuses to sell her soul to the devils this season, like she did on the island, and she tells Kellyanne that she does not want to win tomorrow. Siobhan comes back to the house to tell them about her x-ray and CAT scan, where there's major damage to her chest and waist, and the way that they compiled her telling her story is just hilarious and held with the montage, and it's pretty much like they're making fun of her and they're making it seem like she's exaggerating. But anyway, Siobhan has to leave. There really isn't much to say about Siobhan. She was somewhat humorous at times and was horrible in the 2 challenges that she did, but her departure is memorable. She has one more season, so we will see what happens there and how I will feel about her there. Bananas is talking Nick up in hopes that he beats Wes, and Wes tells Evan that the team made a dumb choice. But Evan is shocked that Evelyn decides to side up with Wes, which really wasn't what they expected. Shadow Fighter is the challenge, or the elimination, where their wrists and ankles are tied to the opponents or their opponents through a rope, and they have to pull off the opponent. And I really did like this elimination, where I found it very cool and neat to watch. And I wish they did it more after this, but I think this is the only time that they do it. Wes beats Nick easily, and after putting on a show at first to make it look close, Evelyn does lose to Kellyanne, though she's essentially called out for quitting by TJ and the cast, and some of them think that she's a douchebag for dragging Kellyanne around only to just quit when that was her intention the entire time. Wes and Johanna have another discussion where she mentions that if he throws the final mission, she will sell the house as her name is on the deed. She's the only one who's named on the house and everything they had together, which honestly, you would think that financial guru Wes would know better, but I don't know. Anyways, he thinks that it is such a low blow, and it is a low blow, but I'm not gonna lie, it was a good TV moment. Nick was booted second instead of first, but unlike Ace, he really didn't show much personality to warrant him coming back, so he rightfully was not called back again. Though I do think the whole fresh meat and the themed seasons regarding the relationships is why he never came back after this. I do find Evelyn's short run on the season to be interesting, with regretting signing with the Devils, despite getting the win and claiming at the time that she wasn't going to regret it, and throwing it so she would refuse to help them win a dime again. You can tell that her mentality regarding the challenge was starting to dim, and she was slowly starting to get ready to move on to real life from here on out and away from the challenge. Everyone is celebrating on the boat, and it's one of the rare times that they're actually outside. Evan is feeling Veronica, and Tanya is climbing too high on the sailboat, where people are worried about her, as she's clearly doing this drunk, and she also makes up with some random woman on the boat who isn't a part of the cast. And we see Veronica, it's not politicking because she doesn't have a dick, so I'll call it polypussing with Evan, since she knows that JFK plus Derek is the alliance that is running things, and it's been too long since she's last been on, so getting in good with him is smart. Adam feels confident and is talking with Danny and Brad about performing well in the challenge, and it seems like they're going to volunteer, and to me it's just clear that one of them is going home here. Wes continues whining to Evan, and I'm over it at this point, despite it being very entertaining at first, since Wes doesn't feel like a champion, and Evan calls Wes out for being selfish, where Wes says that Evan is selfish and a coward, and Evan calls out Wes. Okay, I said that already, with Evan calling Wes selfish, but Evan essentially just walks off since he's tired of Wes's bullshit. We get some more whining from Wes regarding the team, and it's just exhausting. But he is right to be mad about the whole Evelyn move, though they call him out for throwing the first challenge, and he really doesn't have a rebuttal for this. The Vets are planning for 4 of their own, pertaining the people who are in that specific alliance, to go in, since they have the majority vote either way regarding choosing who to send into actual elimination, and Susie knows aligning with Evan, the leader, is the way to go. And it's interesting that she states that Evan is the leader, despite all of Kenny's showboating in the confessionals. And Bananas not being the top dog yet. Danny, Adam, Brad, Brianna, Casey, and Kimberly volunteer for the challengers, with Ibis, Susie, Veronica, Evan, Kenny, and Cyrus volunteering. Though the plan was for Tanya to go in again, and Bananas calls out Veronica for her non-respectable polypussing game, which is kind of ironic since Johnny would sling his dick around in a lot of the Era 3 seasons to benefit his game, but I guess that didn't happen yet, so he has to put himself on this moral high ground. Anyways, the challenge is called Repo Race, where the teams have to create a bridge and go through the obstacle courses without touching the sand. The challenge is a pretty interesting one, but I would admit that the challengers win the challenge very shockingly, essentially due to Derek's lack of thinking, and this will be something that comes up regarding him throughout the season. Brad is planning to send Casey in since she is the weakest link, though Kellyanne thinks that they should send someone who could be a challenger, and this is such a dumb move on our part, since the other two women are still very new to the show, and Brad was definitely correct in his mindset here, but this will all play in later on in the season. Brianna and Adam are voted into the elimination, and the nominees choose Cyrus because Adam is close to Evan and Kenny, apparently, and Susie, which is a very dumb move on Brianna's part. Susie and Cyrus are told about the nominations, and Susie kind of snaps at Adam. Brianna feels comfortable about being very strong, and it's kind of delusional since she really hasn't proven herself so far, and going against the undefeated Susie is just ridiculous. The elimination is burnout, where they have to redirect the water into a barrel where they put out the opponent's fire, and it's really not that interesting of an elimination to watch on screen. Cyrus and Susie predictably win the eliminations. Veronica is kind of taunting Evan about not making the first move on her, but they are flirting pretty softly, and then the episode ends with them in bed during the next morning, so who in the hell knows what happens there? I really have nothing to say about either of the boots here. Adam is clearly not relevant without CT, hence being paired with him in his final season, and Brianna was literally just there and didn't offer much of anything in her 3 episodes, so I get why she's a one and done. Katie, who has been invisible in the season up until this point, which isn't a good sign, sees a plunger on her bed, and her drunk ass is really pissed off, rightfully so, since she knows that it was one of either Kenny or Edwin, where she slams the toilet plunger on one of their beds and tries to swing it on them as well. Kenny makes some mean comments about her being ugly, dead weight in the challenge, and it's just ridiculous, honestly. The challengers are worried about their team, and JFK continue picking on Tanya, where they throw a bunch of stuff at her, where Johnny throws some powder on her, and it's going too far. She's really starting to lose it and inhibit some of the behavior that was put on the lawsuit she filed against Evan, Kenny, MTV, and Bonham Murray. Apparently, it was this night where the alleged event took place, where she was sleeping drunk, she didn't have many clothes on, and a picture was taken of her without her consent, and a toothbrush that was Wes's may or may not have been inserted into her. And honestly, something should have been done way before it even got to this point. Obviously, there are some back and forth about what actually happened. Since a few of the people were in the room, Tanya's lawsuit mentioned that it was recorded and the producers did absolutely nothing to stop it, and the cast was aware of it, while other cast members mentioned that nothing was inserted. It was a prank that went too far, and Tanya wasn't even awake to know what happened, and she was told certain information by certain cast members to skew it in a certain way. And honestly, that's all I'm going to say about it. But it just really shows the negative atmosphere of the challenge at the time, where the men were allowed to do anything they wanted. They were actively encouraged to do these vile antics, which are more often than not against women instead of men. The women really were not protected. They weren't given the spotlight on the show. The men were propped up as the faces of the show. They were given the development. And you can definitely see the bias in favor of the men, even by the production team. So, Tanya speaks to Ibis and Katie about her drinking too much, and they are comforting her, where she claims that she is not like this in real life, and they all want her to get some help. Kimberly and Katie talk about how they keep on drawing the line, and Kenny/Evan together are awful. Another plunger is on Katie's bed for the second night in a row, and she ends up snapping on Sarah, who is giggling, and she yells over and over and over again about Sarah's whore ass needing to leave, leave, leave. Makes fun of Sarah for being fat, though Sarah is far from being fat and has ugly tattoos. Evan and Kenny are comforting Sarah, though it's ironic since Kenny ends up treating her the same way later on in the season and using the same talking points that Katie used as well. Katie, Susie, Tanya, Darrell, Derek, and Johnny volunteer for the champions, and Casey, Kimberly, Sarah, Kohada, Danny, and Dunbar all volunteer for the challengers, where the Burning Bridge challenge is where they have to swim underwater to unleash a puzzle piece from underwater, and this is just a standard challenge that you won't remember much of in general and that you've seen several variations of in future seasons. Of course, the champions win, and Casey really blows it for the challengers. Darrell volunteers himself to go against Danny, and Katie volunteers to come back, and after being told Casey, who she wanted, isn't an option, she chooses Sarah. Tanya is drunk as hell, and she eats a bug that she kills, which disgusting, and we see her speaking to Veronica about the Inferno 2, which happened, like 4 or 5 years ago at this point, and taking pictures of her naked and showing it around, where Veronica mentions that it is just fun, and she's lacking any sort of accountability over it, refusing to see Tanya's perspective, or really just acknowledging that she was wrong for doing this. Tanya rants about Veronica, and it causes for another confrontation between the two women, where she tells Veronica to shut the hell up. Tanya throws Veronica's noodles on the floor, and Veronica is laughing at Tanya, which is just pissing Tanya off even more. Veronica mentions that no one thinks that she is sober. Tanya is tired of Veronica making fun of someone who is half her age, and Veronica is like, no one is half my age here, no, certainly not you. Veronica calls Tanya crazy, mentions let's call a spade, and then Tanya hits Veronica several times. They don't show it on the actual episode, but on a deleted extended scene where Tanya makes fun of Veronica for being bisexual more than once during the fight, stating that she needs to decide whether she needs to like dick, or whether she likes dick, or whether she likes vagina. And Tanya even outed Veronica's relationship with Rachel on the Inferno 2 special, and we see Tanya attacking and hitting Veronica several times. And apparently, Tanya said some homophobic commentary on her Real World season, from what I can recall, so this is just consistent with that behavior. So, Evan is hugging Tanya, who's breaking down, and Evan is yelling at Veronica, and it's ironic since he's consoling the person he allegedly harmed without consent, and from what some people said, it was mainly him and not Kenny, so I don't know if he was doing this for bias remorse. Allegedly, I don't know. I wasn't there, and most of us weren't there, and most of the cast weren't even there, so this is all alleged. So Tanya is immediately sent home, and Evan and Johnny mention that Veronica, i.e. a sane person, fighting with an insane person, i.e. Tanya, just makes her look worse, and I can honestly kind of get their perspective when it comes to this. Tanya is someone who should have been off the show long before the season, and seeing the producers let her decline for entertainment, where things went way too far, is a fault on them, where they allegedly let her get harmed and enabled her drinking. While she is now banned from the show due to her lawsuit, and I do give her props for actually throwing a lawsuit, since many reality TV stars just talk shit but never file them paperwork, I am hoping that she's living her life privately in a healthy way outside of the cameras and hopefully in a small town. West calls out Evan, Kenny, and Johnny for picking on Tanya the entire season and are now pretending to act innocent. And West is very correct on this. And Evan mentions that it was everyone. West mentions that Derek himself and Kahara never did that. Kenny just mentions that he is here to win. Absolutely no accountability whatsoever from Kenny. And Derek is defending the awful trio by mentioning that they shouldn't be pinpointed. And honestly, this just shows how awful Derek is in general with the enabling, and he isn't too much worse than the three in general, especially when it comes to this era. And it just really just makes me very frustrated with him. At the same time, you can call West out for being hypocritical, since he would pour a huge Coke bottle on Carmela's head 3 seasons later, and honestly, that might have been like a year and a half or 2 seasons after this, or 2 years after this filmed. But you can say that this didn't happen yet, so at this point, West wasn't being hypocritical. I don't know, it depends on how you look at it. In another conversation, Katie speaks to Derek about how this is her last challenge, where she's ready to be a wife and a mother, and he doesn't believe her. You can definitely tell that Katie was over the show at this point, and while she did do Cutthroat a year after this, she did keep her promise about being done with the show, and only did Battle of the Eras due to it being a very circumstantial season, so she was done for over a decade. The elimination is O-ring, where they will be suspended in the air, where they have to pull the ring from their opponent. And I really do like this elimination, and I wish they did it more than just this one time. Sarah went against Katie, where they're literally flicking one another off during the elimination, which I found to be fun, and Darrell unshockingly went against Danny. Susie is glad that her future BFF took out Katie, and the crazy Katie/Tanya are gone. But it's clear that Veronica is being set up as the next target, and Veronica is also in OG. Kenny yet again doesn't deny being a chauvinistic pig, but mentions that the girls can't swim or do anything. Honestly, Kenny is so loathsome, and I think I dislike him more than anyone else in the trio. I don't remember a thing about Danny on the season, but him consistently underperforming in seasons is consistent, I guess. I don't know why he was given so many more chances, where he doesn't even offer character moments anymore. Katie was essentially invisible until her last episode, but she had a very memorable final episode, making her more memorable than she was in her last few seasons, where she was just there, but you can definitely tell that she was checked out and needed to leave the show. So they are traveling through Thailand during a day off, and it's a nice sense of relaxation since they are halfway through the season. Kahara and Kellyanne are hanging out, and he is trying to make it seem like there are feelings there, though they were done way before the challenge, based on what they said during the island. Wes and Johanna are talking about his relationship with Kellyanne, and coming in with a relationship is not smart, where she doesn't want them to speak if they are not able to be friends, and Johanna is referring to herself and Wes, as she doesn't like inconsistent friends. Wes talks a lot of shit about Kahara in the confessionals because he thinks that Kahara is obsessed with Kellyanne, despite us never seeing it, and he wants to send home Kahara, despite his girlfriend not liking the idea. A part of me feels like this is Wes starting to somewhat self-produce himself, where he's known for creating these situations and pulling them out of nowhere, just so he can create an interesting storyline, or to create a certain narrative that really doesn't exist. Johanna, Susie, and Ibis are planning to get Veronica into the elimination with Kellyanne, and Veronica ends up overhearing this, so she speaks to Evan about it. Susie is literally downstairs to overhear their conversation as well. Essentially, in my opinion, Veronica is getting the Coral Gauntlet 3 treatment, where she was running things in her old school era and is struggling now without her people. Casey, Kelly Ann, Kimberly, Dunbar, Brad, and Kahara are nominated from the challengers, and Ibis, Veronica, Johanna, Wes, Evan, and Kenny are nominated from the champions. The challenge is Block Party, where they have to use the blocks to create stairs and create a stairway, but some of the opponents are tied to the pole where the other team has to pull them off, so there's a lot of physical contact in this, but it isn't really dangerous either. Of course, the champions win the challenge, and Bananas is campaigning to send Wes in, and Ibis is expecting for Veronica to be sent in as well, with Kelly Ann, or this is the plan that they created before the challenge. Wes chooses to go after Kahara, and Veronica campaigns for herself against Ibis, since she knows that she's a better player than Ibis. It is a deadlock to decide whether Veronica goes in against Kelly Ann or Kimberly. So the entire team now has to come in to vote. Cyrus decides to start the train to vote in Ibis against Kimberly, and she is very shocked. And it's mainly the OGs who voted this way, but apparently a lot of the people who weren't a part of the nomination group didn't plot for what would have happened in the scenario. But Ibis is shocked since things changed with a 6-5 vote in favor of her going in. Ibis tells Johnny to shut up and causes for the two of them to kind of go back and forth, since he's trying to explain himself, and then he rants about being seen as the shithead villain again, where he covers his mouth with tape, and it's just another example of Bananas not really liking to take accountability for his actions. Ibis feels betrayed by Derek, since they are from the same Road Rule season, and he tries to apologize to her, but she pretty much tells him to screw off, but he explains in the confessional that Veronica is a better player. Johanna and Kelly Ann starts to argue about how Wes is still talking shit about her, i.e. Johanna, and Kelly Ann ends up reporting all of this to Wes, and he is tired of how someone who should be a friend is being a poor friend. The elimination is Spool, where you have to unwrap your rope to ring the gong while going through a bunch of obstacles, and this is a really good elimination. Shockingly, Kahara beats Wes, who gets his first elimination loss ever here after being the elimination king, and Kimberly beats Ibis, though the others mention that Johanna was kind of sad about Wes leaving, and she tells Kellyanne to leave her alone, since she does not care about their relationship at all. Wes was the star of the season up until this point, and I do think his drama fueled the season, without being too toxic like JFK, but something about him comes off as very whiny and self-aggrandizing, so I was getting tired of him by the time his journey ended here. The story really wasn't going anywhere anymore, but it would lead to how he acts in his next 2 seasons. Ibis is someone that I always generally forgot about, and I don't really know why. She did get screwed over in her last episode, and props to her for working for a TV production now and moving on, but she just never drew interest in me in any of her challenge seasons. Kellyanne reads the note Wes left, and Susie and Johanna are talking about sending Veronica in with Kellyanne. Susie calls her chunkies, and they talk about how Veronica hasn't done anything in the season. Johnny is talking to Evan about their game, and it is an argument because Evan is setting things up for himself to do well, while Johnny knows that he's going to get targeted due to having less relationships. And he is seen as a lot more sneaky and cunning, and this comes up here and there throughout the season. Veronica is speaking with Kelly Ann and Casey about how she does not like her team, especially the woman, and she would be fine with throwing a challenge, and Derek is watching this. Everyone but Kim goes in for the challengers, where Bananas, Derek, Cyrus, Johanna, Susie, and Veronica are in for the champions. Fruit of Your Labor is a challenge where they have to throw the food over the wall, and there are teammates on the other end of this wall to catch it, and there's a few obstacles to get the fruit into the basket, but they can't use their hands to get the fruit, and I think this is a fun and unique challenge. But this is where someone could have easily gotten hurt, especially by the wall part where these heavy fruit are being thrown over, and it could have hit any of them in the face. And there's really not a good defense for a situation that they could have used to prevent something like this. Veronica sees through her teammates' plan to give her the least responsibilities, since they think that she's going to throw it. Of course, the champions win the challenge, and Bananas is speaking to Derek about Cyrus being injured, and he is dead weight. And Evan sees through Banana's tactics, with campaigning against Cyrus to save his own ass. Cyrus thought that he was not going to go in, since he went in last time, where Derek and especially Johnny never intended on going in, despite it seeming like one of them was going to volunteer to go into elimination. Veronica is voted in against Kellyanne, and she calls Derek out for being a coward, where he mentions that she tried to throw the challenge and they are outnumbered. And Cyrus is nominated against Kahada. Cyrus complains to a bunch of the other men about being sandbagged, and Kellyanne is actually looking forward to going in, since she wants to actually earn an elimination win here. Susie admits her alliance with Johanna, Evan, and Kenny, and Veronica is over Evan in general while she hears them plotting, where they have a conversation in their bunk, or in her bunk, which is covered, and she's calling him out. And did she not watch what happened to Coral a few seasons ago? He literally says the same thing about her that he said about Coral, with it being a new generation, and she needs to find a way to adapt and make friends. Cyrus and Veronica are essentially willing to work for the other team if they win their eliminations. Hog tie is the elimination where they are tied upside down under a log and they have to go across it to get a key and then bring it back to get a gong. And we've seen this elimination in many future seasons and eras, and it is a good one. Kahada wins his second consecutive elimination despite Cyrus having the lead, and Kellyanne does end up beating Veronica. Bananas decides to put a bunch of feathers and syrup on a sleeping Derek, and Derek loses it since he literally piles on Bananas since some of it got on his family pictures. And I'm shocked that it didn't turn it into a Darrell Brad situation that will happen in a few episodes. And it very well could have between Johnny and Derek. And Johnny says, "Fuck you, Evan," because he feels like he is being scapegoated in the situation. It was nice seeing Cyrus and Veronica return after their long hiatuses, where she didn't appear at all in this era, and Cyrus was on the first season of this era. Veronica had the Coral arc of being out of her depths and getting into drama, in addition to a pathetic romance with Evan, but you can see it as karmic, based on how she treated people during her run. Cyrus himself didn't bring much overall, and I see why he's done on the flagship show, but we definitely will see him on All Stars. Veronica goes on an even longer hiatus after this and only returns literally at the tail end of Era 3, where she does a few early 30s seasons, and then of course she will continue on All Stars after that. Everyone is swimming around and having fun in the pool, and there's a game of Truth or Dare where Sarah is flirting with Kenny and Johnny/Evan expose Dunbar and Kimberly for hooking up in the bathroom, and I guess this is a continuation from their hidden hookups from last season. Brad is annoyed with Casey, and the others are talking about how the Challengers screwed up by not getting rid of Casey when they won in the third episode. She speaks to the champions about how good she is position-wise, since she knows that her team loathes her, and that was the words that she used, or those were the words that she used, and Brad is over Casey just doing these shows to have fun, and not preparing or doing anything, and to quit smoking at least. Johanna really doesn't care about it anymore, where if she goes home, and it's not the worst thing ever, where she wants to go in with Casey, but Kenny makes it clear that he is fine with it, and he's fine with the more women being booted. And of course this asshole thinks that. Rotary Club is the challenge where they have to roll down a haystack in a wheel, and they have to push the tire back to the team zone, and it's a solid challenge overall. To no one's surprise, the champions win the challenge, and Johanna tells Sarah that she's going to choose her, and mentions that it is Sarah's first season, and she will have many more seasons to come, and Johanna is correct on this. It's an easy one since Darrell chooses Kahada as he wants the money, and Johanna chooses Sarah since she thinks that it will be more embarrassing to lose against Casey, and it seems like Johanna is already checked out here. Susie and Sarah talk about their friendship, which is still strong, today as I'm recording this, where they host a podcast together, but Susie is hoping for Johanna to come back. Kahada is hoping that his luck with the Ruins will continue with a third win, but he knows that it is a lot of pressure, since once you are in, he will have to continue to fight. Johanna tells Susie that she is checked out, and Susie is trying to cheer her up, and it is clear that Johanna is over the show overall at this point. Brad is talking about the Gauntlet 3, where he is comparing smoking, drinking, lazy Casey to Eric, who lost that season for that team in general. Crunch is the elimination, where they have to hold themselves above water with holding the weight, and Johanna easily loses to Sarah. Kahada's winning streak does end, where he does lose to Darrell. Brad calls out Casey when it comes to her poor performance and her partying slash smoking, and everyone else is working hard, and Casey really doesn't give a fuck about his dramatics at all. Johanna definitely had her drama with Wes and Kellyanne, which is definitely what the producers wanted, but she was clearly checked out after Wes left. The misogynistic atmosphere probably did not help, though it wasn't really directed to her, and she really wasn't a good competitor. So I see why she bowed out, and we haven't seen her since, and we will never see her again. Kahara was definitely more interesting in this season than he was on his last, with having a winning streak in his final few episodes, being a bit more present in the dynamics and the episodes overall, shocking people with his competitiveness, and I found him a lot funnier here as well. It is weird that he would not return for many years until mid-era 3. It is Kellyanne's birthday, and Dunbar doesn't feel like celebrating or drinking, since he and Brad are the only guys left on the team. Brad is ranting about Casey to Susie, and she is watching him unravel, where she also talks about how she is the only woman on her team, and if they do not give her Casey, she will throw the challenges. So this is what she is telling the other champions. Kellyanne confronts them about them supposedly sleeping together on the Real World season, or that's what she is claiming that Dunbar is telling people, where he doesn't confirm or deny it. So honestly, it's clear that it is true that he's telling people this, and she's screaming her head off. And why the fuck does this even matter? Brad tells her to calm down and to not focus on it, or at least focus in it. And it is ironic coming from him, especially with what will happen later on in the episode. And Kellyanne is drunkenly yelling at him for doing absolutely nothing wrong, and the two of them are arguing out of absolute nowhere. Kellyanne is crying hysterically in the washroom and is being comforted by Susie about this rumor, and the mental part is causing her to calm down, and all of this is just so utterly ridiculous. Dunbar does mention to Brad and Kimberly that Kellyanne did want to fuck him, and Brad states, "My thoughts. Who gives a shit?" People talk about Brad's increasing drinking, or his increased drinking. Brad is drunk as hell, and he wants to fight someone, where he's yoking up Darrell, who pushes him back. Apparently, this started because he was really sad about losing Kahara, and Darrell didn't like that Brad was so happy for Kahara, or sad for Kahara, but not happy for him, since he thought they were friends too. Darrell wanted them to drink to celebrate his win. Brad didn't want to, but then he felt forced to, and this kind of just led up to all of this. So, the two are getting rowdy, and Brad is kicking Derek away from him. Brad wants Derek to stand the fuck up, and Darrell is trying to keep calm, but Brad is insistent on fighting him. Darrell is starting to get frustrated as Brad yells, Why is he still sitting the fuck down? Yo, why are you sitting the fuck down? Darrell calls him a bitch. Brad approaches to shove and try to kick him, but Darrell pushes him on the floor and gives him several punches in his face. Brad's eye is essentially gushing, and his face is really swollen, where he even wants to fight Kenny and Evan. The producers make the right choice to boot both Brad and Darrell home, and they will fuck this up in the future where violence is brought up. And they both immediately regret what happened. Brad had an interesting story this season, with being stuck with a bunch of scrubs and continuously losing, where he just lost it more and more, though it did lead to this unfortunate result. You can definitely start to see why he soon left the show and didn't come back for a while around this point. Darrell came back after being off the show for a few years, and he was definitely more unlikable with his misogynistic comments and just his more aggressive demeanor in general. He blew what would have been an easy fifth win here, and his trajectory after this is never the same compared to his first 4 seasons, and he was to go on another hiatus after the very next season. The JEKD family feels great because they have no opposition, and Dunbar realizes that he is screwed, since he has to go into the last 2 duels no matter what. We do see more arguing with Kellyanne and Dunbar, where she is telling everyone that she wants him to lose. He calls her a bitch, and she brings up the stuff about them fucking, not fucking, once again. So, I just don't give a shit about this argument whatsoever. So after all of that, He is venting to Kimberly, and she decides to pick another fight with him, and by she, I mean Kellyanne, where he really just wants her to leave him alone, but she continues to go on and on because she wants to annoy the hell out of him. Susie tells the men that she has an incentive to throw now, since the challengers will throw in Casey where the champions won't, so they better do what Susie wants, and she's very smart for this. Susie sees Kellyanne and Casey listening to the conversation, and she is mad that they're eating popcorn, so Susie picks a fight with the two women, and they both find it to be abhorrently absurd, where Casey tells Susie that it isn't her fault that the champions refused to nominate her. They go out and dare Sarah to kiss Kenny, where he is not into it at all, and she does kiss him. And their dynamic will get a lot of focus from here on out. One guy from the champs is saved, i.e. Evan, and one girl from the challengers is saved, i.e. Sarah, where on the fence is the challenge where they all are at the top of the building and climb across fences in the air to ring the gong. And I honestly don't like this challenge and didn't find it fun or entertaining to watch. We see the asshole JEKS tell Derek to shake Sarah off, and of course, Derek follows his masters and then justifies it by saying, hey, I'm around a bunch of assholes, of course I'm going to be influenced by that. And it's all just really unnecessary. Of course, the champions win, and of course, Evan and Kenny do not want to give Susie what she wants, where they decide to nominate Kimberly, and Johnny does decide to step up, even when he didn't plan on it, since everyone talked about him being shady overall, and he chooses to go against Dunbar. Ragdoll is the challenge where it's essentially a pole wrestle but with a rope, and I do think it's a good elimination. Susie and Kimberly really get down and dirty in the elimination, and it is a really good matchup. Despite the tough matchup, it does go predictably, with Susie beating Kimberly, and of course Bananas ends up beating Dunbar. Kimberly made it further this season than she did in last season, but she was less memorable here as well. She did have some witty lines here and there in the confessionals, and she was clearly hooking up with Dunbar again, though they made it under the radar. I see why she doesn't come back for another season, but she had a solid enough 2-season run as a competitor and somewhat as a character regarding the storyline stuff. Dunbar was really under the radar this season, and apparently he was not speaking to many people during the season, where he was very introverted. It was interesting seeing that the people that he was so aligned with on the island don't give a fuck about him here at all. This is far from the last we will see of him, clearly. Kenny continues his misogynistic comments, but Susie knows that she is going in, since the other team has no men, where she openly discusses with them about how they want the next elimination to go down. The guys, especially Kenny and Evan, are making fun of Sarah as she's just letting it kind of happen, and Bananas is having Inferno 3 flashbacks, where Susie and Bananas are arguing about the Inferno 3, where she and Kara didn't really help the team whatsoever, and are untrustworthy as hell, where she essentially thinks that he is an annoying ass baby, and he resents the two women for causing him to lose so much money for the first time in his life. Johnny, Evan, Kenny, and Derek feel great that they are guaranteed to be in the final, where they are thinking about getting Kellyanne in the elimination, since she just wants money, since Kellyanne knows that she won't win, and taking money is the only thing she can do by eliminating Susie. Kenny brags about Sarah liking the abuse, and it's kind of sad that he's correct about this, where she's even defending him today, but maybe he treats her better outside of the house? But I don't know. Though she ends up breaking down to Susie. Evan attempts to cheer Sarah up, though I don't know how genuine it is, but it does make him look better compared to Kenny, at least on the surface. But it is reminding her of high school where she was picked on, and Sarah complains about Bananas to Evan, though he mentions in the confessional that they don't need her, and it is a part of the sex thing. Wait, hold on. Did he say that about Sarah or Susie? I don't know, that kind of seems weird, but it just shows Evan's pathology either way. Bananas continues to complain about Susie, and there's more arguing with Sarah and Kenny, where he tells her that she can't handle the game because she can't handle his yelling and taunts, which I'm so tired of talking about Kenny in general. Wall Walker is the challenge where they need to run up the ramp to get the flowers. Casey performs pathetically in the challenge where she does quit it and ends up arguing with TJ for a bet. The champions do not throw the challenge. They, of course, win, and Susie gets to choose who to go against by TJ, and she chooses Casey right then and there. The guys want Susie to go home since Casey in the final benefits them, and they get more money when Susie leaves, though Johnny is continuing to whine and complain. Muay Thai is the elimination where they have to kick a bunch of bamboos, or a line of bamboos, and this is a fine enough elimination. Apparently, the one bamboo of Casey's that wouldn't break, or one of the bamboos that she kept on trying to kick didn't break, and Susie of course wins, and after that elimination, some of the guys apparently tried to break that same bamboo that Casey couldn't break, but they couldn't break it. And this sounds familiar to another situation on the final reckoning. Anyways, Casey was pretty fun with how much she sucks on the season competitively and how the edit as well as the cast just dragged her for it, with Casey in general just not caring whatsoever and kind of just laughing it off. At the same time, there wasn't a whole lot for her to do, so I see why this is her last flagship season, though we of course see her on All Stars. The champions are messing around before the final. Derek is showing pictures of his family to everyone, and he's talking about how fatherhood has changed him. Sarah and Kellyanne do feel optimistic despite the circumstances. We see some banter between Sarah and Kenny about him pestering her, and he sees the mental taunting as like 90% of the game, which shows his shitty mentality. I'll put it nicely. Where, of course, Evan and Johnny are supportive of it because, of course, and they really ever put this energy towards men because, of course. Sarah starts to laugh it off, but she gets tired of it, and Kenny makes fun of Sarah's tattoos, which Katie also did earlier in the season, and this is where she finally has enough. The final challenge is where they have to go through a bunch of checkpoints and get an artifact once they get it, and they will have to put these artifacts together at the end. The first checkpoint is an eating challenge, then they move to a jigsaw puzzle, and then they have to crawl under a mud pit, then walking over a bunch of logs. Sarah and Kellyanne are in the lead for a lot of it, but of course the champions catch up. They then have to move on to the challenge, or the next checkpoint, where Kenny, Derek, and Kellyanne are essentially useless since it's a puzzle, and it means that the teams are pretty balanced up till this point. Susie helps them gain the lead, and the champions never lose their lead after this. After a run, the champions do predictably win the season. Sarah is most definitely the rookie of the season, but there's really no other choice since there are only two other rookies and they are both gone by episode 3, while not doing much at all. She came off as really likable here, and how much she left the challenge made you really want her to do well, and she did keep up with the veterans all the way around. Of course, we are going to see a lot more of Sarah in the future, but she had a really good season here. Kellyanne definitely proved herself as a competitor, and while she did have some drama throughout the season, and her relationship with Wes was a thing, she wasn't buried by a lot of that compared to many of the women in this era, especially this portion of the era, so she was interesting to watch here. It will take her many years to come back, and I could see how the season exhausted her overall. What is there to even say about Derek? It's another season where he is in the background, following JEK, and aside of the random stuff with Johnny, he didn't do much here. I definitely see why he focused on his family for several years soon after the season. Johnny was actually the most tolerable one out of the trio, which is something I was not expecting, though he had several moments of him whining and victimizing himself and just being an annoying jackass overall. Kenny and Evan were horrendous this season. Most of the misogynistic comments came from them, and they showed no remorse or accountability over their actions, and they all really bring out the worst in one another. In addition to what they did on the season that would allegedly or eventually get them banned, here they disgust me, but I'll discuss more of that during the Era 2 breakdown. Susie herself really isn't likable or entertaining really at all throughout the season or in the show in general, but she has a certain cadence with how she carries herself that you have to find respectable and brings respect. She won several eliminations and had her own with the guys in the strategic and drama department, but there's no need for her to come back, so I'm fine with this being her final season. Apparently she met her husband who was working behind the scenes this season, so she won in more ways than one. Alrighty, so I was not expecting this video to be an hour long, but you could say that it's somewhat of a good thing because it means that I have a lot more to say about it, despite it having the same amount of episode count and the same length per episode pertaining some of the more recent seasons, where the longest video up until this point regarding the challenge that I've done is 45 minutes pertaining to seasons, so it means I have a lot to talk about, so that can be seen as a good and a bad thing as well. So, how do I feel about the ruins? It is arguably the most toxic season of the show's history. It was a combination of production kind of just letting the men run rampant with their antics and not really putting them into check. Also, just the late 2000s atmosphere just encouraged all of this. The women really weren't protected, and with the team seasons still continuing but not being based off of road rules and real world anymore, it caused a lot of these gender wars and these misogynistic mentalities and pathologies. When it comes to the competition, there really was no competition in the season, but there are seasons before this and after this that really don't have competition, but there are other elements of it that makes it good. The drama in this season is a very mixed bag, as some of it is very good, while some of it is really just trashy and really unenjoyable as well. Honestly, when you look at this season, it is a prime example of how Jay, EK, and even Derek all bring out the worst in one another when they're all together, and really just isn't a pleasant experience. And I'm glad that this season is the season where they realized that things needed to change, since if they were all on many more seasons after this, I do think the show would have eventually got cancelled, but their response to handling the issues of the season took way too long since it wasn't immediate. When you look at the cast of the women, so many of them do not return after this, and I think that just due to the traumatizing atmosphere of the season and production not letting them really leave their house anymore just caused way too much for a lot of the women in general. Also, I noticed that a lot of the people who did one or two seasons up until this point didn't really get a chance to come back, especially since after the season, you'll see a lot of the themes of the season being about relationships. So, exes, rivals, stuff like that start to become more and more apparent in Era 3 especially, and they decided to do a second fresh meet as well, since I believe they realized a lot of the more recent rookies are kind of duds, so they decided to do that. I don't know if this season will end up in my bottom 10 overall when I rank all of the seasons, since obviously it's much better than The Island, and some of the older seasons just aren't really good, and we haven't gotten to some of the poor Era 4 seasons, so it'll be interesting to see where the season ranks overall. Anyways, we are closing in on Era 2, where there are 2 more seasons, and then I'm going to do the Era 2 recap, where I'll delve more into all of this later. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Bye!